Welcome along to La Course en Tête's coverage of the 2021 Tour de France. The Grand Boucle, the Big Wahoonie, well, it's here, and so are we, along with Peloton magazine and our presenting sponsor Hyperice, keeping this year's teams fresh day after day. Cue the music. There we go, bit of Paolo, and as always, a hearty bonjour to our Aérogramme subscribers. Ça va? Ça va bien, merci. I'm OJ Borge, hosting the semi-regular podcast across the next 3 weeks or so, including a mountain special when the race makes it to the double ascent of the Beast of Provence. And what we're going to do on these La Course en Tête podcasts is go deeper than the other daily podcasts with our team of seasoned, experienced, and some would say maybe grizzled and slightly belligerent journalists, asking the questions that no one else is focusing on, such as, will Mark Cavendish break Merckx's all-time win record? Who is actually leading Ineos? And is there ever a situation where white bib shorts are okay? I personally am very excited, but I am knotted in France. 75% of this podcast is Pete Cossins, Sophie Smith, and Jeremy Whittle, all somewhere in Brittany. Jeremy, where exactly are you right now? Paint us a picture.
The picture I'd paint is a bit of a bizarre one because we're all sitting 20 metres apart to avoid getting an echo on this podcast in a kind of low-rent dining suite where you have to pay like €20 to have a carton of heated up pasta.
So you're having to pay for your own food because normally you would have some sort of catering.
Well, yeah, I know you would think that, wouldn't you? So there's sadly, I know you have in your head ice sculptures and oysters, OJ, but it's not like that.
I've always got ice sculptures and oysters in my head. I tell you what, let's do to start this off before we get into who we think is going to win, the parkour and things like that. Let's do a game of how you got to France top trumps. Jeremy, let's start with you. What was your journey like?
It was pretty straightforward because I just had to drive a car from Britain to Brittany. That was the straightforward bit. The unstraightforward bit was all the paperwork, the testing, and the game of cat and mouse with border control. But I got here in the end.
Nice. Pete, what was your journey like?
To France. I was already in France, but I've come a long way. I've come 10 hours from Foix in the French Pyrenees. Not quite the furthest distance I could drive in France, but almost 1,000 kilometres all the way to Brest.
Okay, and then Sophie, what was your journey like?
Well, I came from Australia, so how long have you got? I don't know if you want to start with nice try with 10, Pete, but door to door for me to get to Paris, it was 36. Then you got the 4-hour train journey to Brest, then the bribery to get permission to leave Australia. I'm just happy to be here, OJ. Let's leave it at that.
Well, what is the vibe like there, Sophie? Because the problem is normally the Grand Départ, the day before the Tour de France starts, everyone's excited, there's a hustle and bustle of journalists, everyone's there, everyone's chatting, no one's seeing everyone mainly for a year. What is it like this year?
It's very different this year. I'm actually freezing. I'm going to wear every piece of clothing that I bought yesterday to the Grand Départ. But this is my first tour, pandemic tour, so it's very different so far to any of the other 8 that I've done. Everyone's in the press room. It's a lot quieter press room. We all have to wear masks. All of the only time I've actually seen a rider at this point was getting a COVID test, which is sort of adjacent to where the press room is. All the press conferences have been done via Zoom. So it feels a bit disjointed at the moment. A bit surreal for me to be here personally, given the journey, but also just doesn't quite feel like the tour yet.
Well, Pete, you've actually been to races this year. Does it feel like the Tour?
It feels different to all of the other races because everything was pretty relaxed at the other races. You could kind of move around. I mean, there were restrictions in place, I should stress that, but they were pretty cool about you speaking to the riders and the press mixing with each other. I mean, at the Tour we come here and we're kind of in these little pens where you're not allowed to mix one journalist with another, and it's all just strict. It's all just a bit more full on. I mean, it's the Tour. That's kind of what you'd expect. I mean, it's pretty much the same as it was last September, to be honest.
I mean, one thing I'd say that is different is that in that the real heyday of the Tour, whether it was kind of the Armstrong years or the Team Sky years, the press room was absolutely packed, and it was actually hard to find enough space to sit down and put your kit down and do your work. This press room is probably half full, and I think there's some uncertainty as to how many people will actually make it out here because of all the travel restrictions that are imposed around the world. Certainly, obviously, we've not got people from kind of North America particularly. There's a few. We haven't got people from Australia apart from our lone maverick journeyist, Sophie, who's made every effort she possibly could to be here, which is fantastic. But it's less busy than it normally is. Yeah, definitely.
Do you think this is the tour changed forever? Because there was whisperings beforehand with, the amount of people who travel around, the ecological footprint it has. Do you think it's changed forever? Will people stay at home, save the money?
I personally think so, yeah. I mean, I think that one of the things that's happened is because of the pandemic, face-to-face access to the riders has gone pretty much completely now. So, we've got very, very limited time that we get with the riders. Before, we used to stand around the team buses at the start and the finish. You could end up having a 20-minute conversation with, a big-name rider before the stage and after the stage. Now everything's controlled by the press officers and access is really limited. So we don't get that much more. Actually, in some days you get the same amount of visibility of the riders as a fan would watching on TV or on social media, and that's going to stay that way. And the other thing is the teams like it because the tour is so demanding and so pressurised that the media intensity of the media attention on some teams was too much for riders. You could see them wilting under the pressure of it sometimes. So I'm sure that the team management much prefer it this way.
Okay, well, let's get into it then. Sophie mentioned the press conferences, Pete. What were the press conferences like? So normally you'd all be in the same room, riders would come up, they sit on a table at the front of the room and you'd ask them questions. Now they are on cameras. Did you still get to ask them questions? Because press conferences have been a hot topic this summer, whether there is a point to them anymore.
Yeah, you do get a chance to have a little lectern at the front of sort of sitting in front of the press with cameras all set up and screens. So you can ask the riders questions directly in inverted commas. So yesterday, for example, I was able to put questions to Geraint Thomas and Richie Porte at Ineos. To be honest, I haven't been to that many press conferences because after you've been to a couple, you kind of, it's the same questions that everybody's asking again and again, and you're really getting nothing new out of them. It's like, what do you think of the opening stages? How's your form? What do you think is going to happen in the first week? And everybody's just waiting for something to happen. Everybody's waiting for Saturday's first stage and for something to watch, to write about.
Well, you mentioned the same question being asked over and over again, and you also mentioned Ineos, because Jeremy, wasn't there a Belgian journalist who asked the same question of the main riders from Ineos? Who is leading your team?
Yeah, that was funny because what happened was they brought their all-star riders in one by one on the team bus. So we had a Zoom link to the Ineos bus. One by one they brought them in. In this order: Geraint Thomas, Richie Carapaz, Richie Porte and Tadej Pogacar. So I stumbled over his name again. Anyway, so then they came on one by one and this guy, Bram, asked each of them, is the order of your appearance in this press conference symbolic of the team hierarchy or leadership? And so Geraint Thomas said yes with a deadpan face and obviously as a joke. Richie Carapaz kind of just didn't know what the question was really and just ignored it and said, well, me and Thomas are the leaders. Richie Porte just said, oh, the road will decide. And then they asked Teo and he didn't like it at all and got quite irate about, well, is the last rider the first rider or is the first rider the first rider? And he got quite kind of you could see he didn't think it was a joke at all. He thought it was quite rude. And there was just a little hint there that I think there are some tensions within that camp about exactly who's top dog.
Well, that's interesting because, Sophie, Ineos, or Sky before it, they've been fairly tight as a group since the Wiggins and Froome falling out of whatever it was, 8-9 years ago. Do you think they're coming in now? Because they've got, on paper, they have the strongest team. It's such a strong lineup. They've got Thomas, Carapaz, Castrovejo, Gogan Hart, Kwiatkowski, Porte, Rowe and Van Baal. That is a strong team. Do you think there is a problem at the top of who is leading, of who Plan A is?
Certainly from the conversations I've had with Richie Porte, no. He's made it clear that he just wants to go all in for Geraint, as Geraint did for him.
Even though he won the Dauphiné? There's no idea that there's glory in there?
No, I think Richie's saying with Ineos for the last 2 seasons of his career, he wants to go back to being a super domestique at Grand Tours. He said, he had a career best third last year. He's had 5 concerted years. He left Sky to have 5 concerted years trying to get it himself. He just says he doesn't want that pressure anymore, that that little bit more of being a Grand Tour leader. He doesn't like it. He says he becomes...
Do you believe that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and the reasons he gave me were quite personal, and because he had said to me initially, "I'm going for Geraint," and I asked the same question. I was like, "Oh, really?" And I was like, "You wouldn't want to try and improve last year?" And he just said to me, "Sophie, I don't think I'm a bad person, but when I'm under that kind of pressure, it gets to me, and I become quite prickly." And I think he's at a point in his career now where he doesn't want to. But Brailsford apparently, David Brailsford, the team manager, sat down with them all of them the night the Dauphiné finished and was almost talking till midnight about different tour strategies. I think it confused Richie a bit. I think their team strategy will be interesting. Communication seems to have been a big thing, and I think the core of their group has raced together all year. So Geraint told them all that he wanted to win Romandy for his confidence, and he did that. And then Richie was up at the Dauphiné, and Geraint sent Richie a message saying, "I'm all in for you." And Richie said it himself, that was smart, because now coming into the Tour, he's more than happy to repay Geraint for the Dauphiné win. But having said that, this is the first sort of season without Froome being top dog there. I know he didn't compete last year.
Do you think there was a power struggle then? Is there a power struggle going on with the Ineos Grenadiers?
I personally think that what will be interesting will be to see, these things always come to a head kind of in the second half of the race. So everybody starts off, with all the camaraderie and all the bonhomie and all the good intentions, and then with four guys potentially in the frame to finish on the podium, it seems quite likely to me, given that there's only kind of maybe 8 riders who we can expect who've got a chance of winning the Tour. It seems very likely that at some point or other they will have to make some choices, and I don't know if everybody's going to go along with it. We've seen in the past, as I say, it goes into the last week of the Tour, and that's when the tensions start to bubble up. So it is possible.
I think the focus is on they don't want anyone to lose time. That's sort of the impression that I've got. Dave Brailsford hates losing, doesn't he? And the fact that they didn't figure at the Tour last year, I still think would be a thorn in his side. My personal theory is he's probably going for a 1-2 or a 1-3 or a 2-3.
You think he wants the clean sweep?
Yeah, I think he wants more than one spot on the podium.
Wow. Okay, so who's plan A then? Who is plan A for the Grenadiers?
I think Geraint's plan A. I mean, he's won it before. He knows what it takes. He's in really good form. I mean, I think he's been in, as he said himself in the press conference, he's been in good form before. I mean, we saw at the 2019 Tour, he finished second to Egan Bernal. Last year at the Giro, he went into that race in fantastic form. Unfortunately, somebody's water bottle took him out and he didn't get a chance to show it. But this year, he's been consistent right from pretty much the start of the season. He won Romandy. He probably could have won the Dauphiné if he'd really gone for it, but he was happy to let Richie win that race and finish. I think he finished third there. He's the main guy. I mean, he's won it. He could win it again.
Okay, well, let's look at the other mega team that's there, the other rock and roll team, which is Jumbo-Visma. Primoz Roglic, Van Aert, Gesink, Kruijswijk, amongst a few more riders on top of that. Do Jumbo-Visma, Jeremy, do they have a team that's strong enough to combat what the Ineos Grenadiers are bringing?
No, I don't believe they do. I think they're significantly underpowered compared to last year. And also, last year their strength in depth was perhaps accentuated by the relatively poor performance of Ineos. So now you've got a rebalancing because you've got a slight... I think it's a quite significantly weaker Jumbo-Visma team. I mean, Sepp Kuss, who was pretty amazing last year, his form has been quite up and down this year so far. Tony Martin's in the kind of autumn of his career, really, or even the twilight of his career, I'd say. I don't think they're as strong a team as they were last year, and I think Ineos are clearly going to be the dominant team, but it's not just about the team, it's about individual riders. And unfortunately, the best rider in the peloton, the most aggressive and exciting rider in the peloton, doesn't ride for either Jumbo-Visma or Ineos, and that's their problem.
Which is Tadej Pogacar, the reigning champion, I would guess you're saying here, Jeremy, who rides for UAE Team Emirates. Is he the out-and-out favourite to retain the yellow jersey?
I'd say yes. I don't know what Pete and Sophie think. I'd definitely say that.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree with that. Absolutely no doubt.
What brings you to that, Pete?
He's been consistent since he won the Tour. He wins. He won Tirreno. He went back to his home country, Slovenia. He won the race there. Not the greatest opposition, but he won it at a canter. And he just looks completely in control of himself, of his rivals. I mean, on paper, his team isn't as strong as Ineos or Jumbo-Visma, but it's certainly a lot stronger than it was last year. I mean, certainly in the mountains, he should get more support. It's going to be hard for people to find a weakness, but I think Ineos, because they've got the numbers, that gives them an advantage, because what they'll be hoping is that they can get 2 or 3 of their riders against Pogacar one-on-one, and that's going to end up with one of them being able to gain time on him. That's their strategy, I think.
Yeah, because I mean, they were saying in the press conference, the 4 of them kind of either saying it outright or suggesting that because they had 4 leaders, he couldn't possibly drop all 4 of them. Well, I'm not sure about that. I kind of tend to think that maybe he can possibly drop all 4 of them, and I think the strongest rider, the strongest card that Ineos have to play is Richard Carapaz, because I think he's so gutsy, and he's really strong in the mountains, and he's just I think he's as much a force of nature almost as Pogacar is. But you look at Pogacar's record already this season. As Pete said, Tirreno Adriatico, the UAE Tour, the Tour of Slovenia, and Liège-Bastogne-Liège. I mean, that's what he's done already, and it's only June.
I was going to say, as much as I hate to say it, he's got youth on his side as well, doesn't he? I think this will be interesting. It's like Ineos have got the experience, but I think they're also one of the youngest squads here. Oldest squads here. Versus, Pogacar, who won the Tour before his 21st birthday last year.
The thing is, he's fearless, isn't he? He's completely, he doesn't know the meaning of kind of like, being conservative or backing off, and he races like a kid. And unfortunately for the other teams, I think if he's in the mood to really destroy people in the mountains, they will not be able to contain him. I mean, it depends, doesn't it? Because obviously there are crashes, mechanicals, all sorts of things that could go wrong. But even last year, if you look at where he was kind of in the final half of the race, where he started the final half of the race, he was still at a disadvantage, but it didn't matter in the end, did it? Because he just crushed everybody.
Well, with that in mind, Jeremy, does that mean that we'll have an exciting race or a conservative race if they're all watching for what Pogacar's going to do at any moment?
The thought of Ineos following him round won't work, so I think they'll have to attack him, and they'll have to seek to put him in trouble by, as they've suggested, serial attacks, by kind of tag teaming their way up the climbs to try and put him in trouble. I just don't happen to think that will work on the evidence of what we've seen so far.
Let's talk about some other names before we get into the parcours of this year's Tour de France. Primoz Roglic, we talked about Jumbo-Vis, but didn't talk about Primoz at all. Didn't win last year, all went wrong for him on that final time trial. He's not had the busiest of starts of season, so he's come into this, fairly raw. I don't know, Pete, maybe you could tell us better, but his whole idea has been to keep himself fresh for this Tour. Yeah,
completely. I mean, he won the Tour of the Basque Country back in April. Normally he would have carried on doing a lot of stage races following that, but instead of doing that, he's kind of absented himself from racing for a couple of months. He spent a lot of time doing recon of the Tour stages. He's been up at Tignes, where he's been spending time with his family, training obviously a lot of the time, but just getting himself into shape. And of course, it's a strategy he's not tried before, so the team don't really know how it's going to turn out. Really, we don't know what to expect either, and it's going to be interesting to see what he does. But I mean, he and Pogacar are definitely the favourites based on both on form this season and obviously on what we saw last September.
Well, if they're the favourites, let's talk about maybe some of the outside chances. What about Julian Alaphilippe? Just become a dad? What do we reckon? He's held the yellow jersey a fair amount. Is he coming just for stages, or do you think there is an honest chance, Sophie, that he could be here to maybe take the win?
I know people have this romantic notion of De Koning winning a Grand Tour, but I didn't understand it at the Giro, and I don't understand it now. Could he be in yellow after the first stage tomorrow or Saturday? Definitely. Could he be in yellow after the second stage? Definitely. But winning the Tour when the rest of their team was selected around more or less Sam Bennett and now Mark Cavendish, unless he's got some mates in the peloton that can help him when the rest of his team's in the Gruppetto, he's not winning the Tour de France.
Isn't there a sense of Pogacar about him, though? He is so exciting when he rides that you sometimes feel he doesn't need a team around him.
Yeah, he's definitely a character, and you love watching him, don't you? Like, he's a real showman, and he plays up to that, and he's capable of some amazing things on some really punchy terrain. But I don't think 2 laps of Mont Ventoux is quite within his remit.
Is
him going to win it? Any other names then, Jeremy? Where else are we looking? Miguel Angel Lopez from Movistar. Has he got a chance this year?
Well, Pete and I were chatting about Miguel Angel Lopez earlier on, and clearly he's a very talented rider, but he is prone, I wrote to say, he's prone to mishaps. And the mishaps I'm thinking of first of all, he's kind of had various instances on the first stage of the tour, of Grand Tours in recent years. He had a spill, if you remember, on that stage in Nice that was kind of semi-neutralised because the roads were so slippery, and he slid into somebody's front garden last year on stage one.
That was when he attacked as well, wasn't it? It was almost...
No, it was one of his teammates. I think it was Omar Freiler attacked, and then he followed him, and then they came around this corner ahead of the TV motorbike, and he just went straight on into somebody's hedge. And then also he started the Giro, I think it was last year, and had this mishap on the opening... Yeah, it was last year, the opening time trial, and ended up riding... It was really bizarre, just lost control of his time trial bike. And of course, he's had that famous incident where he once had a fight with a fan in the Giro as well. So I'm never quite sure what's going to happen with him, but he's obviously very talented. He won the Mont Ventoux one-day race a few weeks ago in spectacular style.
Is that the fastest time ever, didn't he?
I don't know if it's the fastest time ever, but it was one of the fastest times ever. So he's obviously in great climbing form, and when he comes to Ventoux, if he can get there intact, then he should be a contender. But we'll see.
We'll see. And then what? Maybe a couple more names just to throw in. Let's just drift through these quickly. David Gaudu for Groupama FDJ, Pete?
I think, it's going to be interesting to see what he does. But the big problem that Gaudu is going to have is the time trials, both in the first week and especially right at the end of the race. He's going to have to gain a lot of time in order to cover any losses. And there'll be quite substantial losses in those time trials. So he'd probably be better off kind of focusing he'll want a top finish, maybe top 5, but winning the race, I can't see that at all.
Okay. Who's putting money on Chris Froome then? Who's doing it?
One name we should mention is Rigo Uran, who won the time trial on the Tour of Switzerland and finished second overall, I believe, and has suddenly had a resurgence in form. And of course, he's finished second overall on the Tour before, and has a Grand Tour pedigree of finishing fairly high up in Grand Tours, including the Giro as well. So, although he's 34, I think Rigoberto Urán could be a sleeper for the podium.
I'm also keeping an eye on, without meaning to sound biased, Lucas Hamilton. Just put yourself in his position. It's his first Grand Tour, it's his first Tour de France, and he's leading the Bike Exchange team, which is also built around Michael Matthews. But in terms of the mountains, they're putting him to work with Simon Yates or is it Adam Yates?
Simon Yates is there.
And thank you, Simon Yates and Esteban Chavez.
Well, how come he's leading it over Simon Yates? Well, why has he become the leader over the top of those other two riders who have more of a pedigree?
Well, Simon Yates said in the press conference that he gave yesterday that he's just riding the Tour for stage wins as a stage hunter, and because he doesn't think it's possible to combine riding the Tour for GC, for general classification, and for a hope of getting in the top 3 in Paris, and that's not compatible with then leaving Paris immediately to get on a plane and do a long-haul flight to Japan for the Tokyo Olympic Games. So he said that his choice was he rode the Giro for the GC, he's riding this race for stages, and then he's heading off to Japan for the road race in the Olympic Games.
Time to talk now about our presenting sponsor. I'm going to do that whilst using their product because I have one and it's amazing, and I think it'd be a nice way to do it as I get my legs fresh again, because I did do a session on the turbo earlier. And now, if you've ever wondered how the Tour de France riders stay fresh and keep pushing day after day, there's the hot spot. They recover with Hyperice's top recovery tech, including the Normatec 2.0 recovery systems after every stage. Normatec technology uses dynamic, compression to increase circulation to the legs, flush out muscle soreness, and helps riders revive themselves quickly. Take your endurance to the next level like a pro. Hyperice technology, including the Normatec 2.0, is available at trekbikes.com. Click the Hyperice banner on our homepage, which is pelotonmagazine.com, to claim a special Tour de France offer. Well, let's take a look at the parcours of the Tour de France 2021. Pete, what are your views on it? Because when I first looked at it, I thought it was a very boring first week.
I don't agree at all. I think it's a really interesting first week. We've got a couple of stages to open up where we've got uphill finishes, a couple of sprints then. I mean, whether you call those boring or not depends on how you view sprints, but we've got Mark Cavendish in them, so that's going to add some edge. Then we've got a time trial, another sprint, then a very interesting stage through the Massif Central that could catch a few people out. A couple of tricky climbs towards the end, and then of course we head across to the Alps. There's some interesting stages between the Alps and the Pyrenees as well. I mean, one of the things that Christian Prudhomme has been trying to do over the last few years is find flat stages where they can get windy conditions, and he's probably better off doing that in the south of France in July than he is in the northern France, because the wind in the south tends to be much fiercer in the summer than it is in the north. You've got the Mistral that blows down the Rhone Valley. There's a couple of stages there that could be affected. When they move across towards the Pyrenees, there's a stage into Carcassonne, which there's another wind that affects the race there, the Tramontane, which sort of blows through the gap between the Pyrenees and the bottom end of the Massif Central. That could have an effect. And then, of course, we've got all these stages in the Pyrenees. So I actually don't see them being too many dead points in the race. I think it's going to be a fascinating race, to be honest.
So if I was going to ask you to choose one stage that it's all going to light up on, you can only choose one stage, what's it going to be?
Yeah, I think the first stage in the Alps, went to Le Grand Bornand's a pretty fascinating stage. It's very, very hard towards the finish. There's 3 first climbs that come pretty much one after another. Mont Saxon-X, the Col de Rome, and then the Col de la Colombière, then a very fast descent into Le Grand Bornand. And that's the kind of stage where Ineos are going to have to use their numbers against Pogacar and Roglic. So I'm really looking forward to that kind of stage and seeing how they play their cards.
Sophie, you got one stage. What are you choosing?
Oh, I'm thinking about it.
Shall I ask Jeremy? Because we all know what stage Jeremy's going to choose. Go on, Jeremy. What stage are you choosing?
I'm really into the stage from Vierzon to Le Creusot.
Go on.
No, obviously, you know exactly what I'm going to say. Obviously, I'm on tenterhooks for stage 11 on the 7th of July, which is the double ascent of Mont Ventoux.
Is it too hard? Is it too hard for fireworks?
No, well, that's my worry. That I think it's so hard, and it depends how hot it is. I don't anticipate it's going to be hot because the weather's a bit uncertain at the moment, which feels like it's going to settle into a heat wave fairly soon in the next week or so. And I thought by the time we get there, if it's kind of in the high 30s, then that stage could be ridden almost as a training ride for the first ascent of the mountain with a breakaway off the front of the race, and then it will only become a real race when they go up the last few kilometres to the summit of the Ventoux on the second ascent, and then they've got a very fast run downhill into Malacen at the bottom where the finish is. So it could look great on TV, but it could be a little bit dull maybe for much of it. I didn't want to say damp squib.
No, don't say that. But does it make much of a difference, the fact that it's not an ascent finish for you, that it's not a mountaintop finish?
No, I don't think it's that. I think it's that the Ventoux is it's kind of a funny time in the race. It's not where everything's at stake. It's kind of where they've had the Alpine stages and they've done a bit of shadow boxing and they've prodded each other, and there'll be some changes in the GC. But it falls at an awkward point. So while I think it will look great on TV and be ever so spectacular, because you can't fail with that mountain when, if the weather's good and you've got the helicopters up there, it always looks amazing. In terms of racing, I think it might be quite cagey.
I mean, there's always fireworks on there, isn't there, in one way or another, including Chris Froome.
There's always drama.
Yeah, Chris Froome running up the hill.
Yeah, there's always something happens. Yeah, there's always something happens on the Ventoux.
Come on then, Sophie, your turn now. You've had time to think about it. What stage are you choosing?
You know what? I'm looking forward just to the opening weekend. I think it'll be... I know that's sort of not a popular answer because everyone likes to pick a big mountain and talk about the GC, but I think there's enough varied terrain there. Caleb Ewan, his press conference in the lead-up said it was too hard for the sprinters, or it was too hard for him. But I think you'll see guys like Julian... I think there'll be enough people to test Julian Alaphilippe. As much as I've said I can see him in yellow after day 1 or day 2, I actually think he might not have it all his own way. I think it might be more competitive the first 2 stages than we think.
Now let's talk about the course. 2022, just check here that I get the branding right. Is it La Tour de France Femme avec Zwift? Is that right?
That is right. I believe that is right. Yes. Yeah.
That is right. Thank you very much. But this year we have another La Course. Jeremy, it starts at a ridiculous time. What time? They have to be up at 5 o'clock in the morning, the riders for La Course.
Well, the race starts at 8:20. So if you work back from arriving at the start, kind of an hour, 45 minutes before the flag drops, to unload the bikes, get the riders ready, coffee, get everybody sorted, quick rub and warm up and stuff. So they've got to be there at I guess an hour before. So that's 7:20 a.m. Then some of them will be out in the country because Brest is full of all the race organisation and the teams for the men's race. So their hotels will probably be maybe 50k away. So that's an hour's drive, which means leaving the hotel at kind of 6:30 in the morning, latest, I guess. And then, they've got to eat as well. They've got to wake up and get dressed and eat. So they're probably looking at a 5 o'clock alarm call. And I think if you ask the men if they do a 5 o'clock alarm call, if you ask Mark Cavendish, I'm pretty sure you get a pretty short shrift with that. But so I think, this is the last kind of, it feels like the final throes of the La Course being a bolt-on to the men's race. And then next year, when we have the women's tour proper, we'll elevate women's racing to the status and the profile that it has long deserved. And we won't anymore have this. And I think La Course is going to continue. But I don't know why it's not on a rest day for the men's race. That seems to me the logical thing, that you have it on a rest day for the men's race so that, it gets the full attention of the media and the full attention of the crowd and TV as well. But it seems a bit inhuman and antisocial to ask the women's peloton to get up so early.
It is very, very early, but it does look like a great field. It looks like it's
not the
going
first time it's...
No, it's not, is it? And you hope this is the last time that things, as Jeremy said, sound and feel like a bolt-on. Now, they always talk about the Tour de France as being a lap of France, whether you go around it clockwise or anti-clockwise. There's also somebody else, and this has been embargoed till this morning, depending on when you're listening to this, but no one could talk about it. Although Jeremy has the inside line about Lachlan Morton and what EF are doing, this alternative Tour de France.
Yeah, it's a very interesting idea. I heard about it yesterday, and as you say, it's embargoed, so a little bit of a scoop. But yeah, Lachlan Morton, who people will know as the kind of maverick Australian adventure racer who's done things like ride from John O'Groats to Land's End in Britain. He's done lots of gravel racing.
Off-road as well.
Yeah. He's done lots of endurance stuff, bike packing now. He's big into bike packing. And with EF, he's been with various teams and it's never really worked out that well. But with EF, he's found, I think, a natural home with Jonathan Vaughters and EF's marketing gurus who've seen that there's a degree now of interest and engagement, in fact, an exploding level of interest in kind of off-road and gravel and adventure racing. And there's a race called the Transcontinental, which is similar to the old ethos of the first editions of the Tour de France, where you ride through the night and you ride until you have to go to sleep, basically in a sleeping bag at the roadside, and you scoop up food as you go along. And you watch it online. If you watch it online, you're a dot watcher because you're watching the GPS tracking of the rider as they go along, and that's what they're going to do. And Lachlan Morton is going to ride. He's going to start stage 1 an hour behind the peloton on the same start line, and he's going to just ride the distances of every stage, and then he's going to ride from every stage finish to every stage start until at some point or other. The idea is that maybe it'll be 3 a.m. in the morning. He will speed silently past some big hotel on the outskirts of a ring road in the south of France and pass all the team buses, and he'll be ahead of the peloton. But he's riding something like 6,000 kilometres. They're doing 3,500. They're doing something like 40,000 metres of vertical ascent. He's doing something like 60,000. So it's quite a big
it's a big
ask. It's a big ask. And the great thing is that he's got to get to Paris ahead of them. That's the plan, that he will arrive in the Champs-Élysées ahead of the peloton and have ridden, every bit of the distance. Ooh. But of course, their final transfer from Bordeaux to Paris, which is kind of like 600-700k, is by plane. So they've got an edge there.
So are you taking a plane as well, Jeremy, or are you driving it?
We're driving it.
Okay, so maybe you could ride it as well.
Maybe. I don't think so, though, OJ. No, maybe you could, though. Maybe that's one for you.
Maybe I
you
could.
don't. You like
Maybe
that.
it's one for me.
You like that kind of publicity stunt stuff.
Well, it's not the publicity. I quite like the challenge of it. But talking of it, EF, with their alternative calendar they had a couple of years ago, all the stuff they've done with Lachlan Morton, and it tends to be more with him. They've done the gravel races and things like that. This just seems like another great idea. And they've shown how a smaller team can do things which sometimes, when they've changed the shirts, they had the duck helmets and the things like that, and the stuff they did with Palace, they seem to have these ideas which almost garner more interest for them than winning stages.
Well, they're definitely agents provocateurs, aren't they? Yes. In the sense that they try to kind of like just disturb things a bit. And I do like that, because I think, so many teams are kind of quite mundane in their thinking and their communications and their marketing, and they do try and do something different. I think there's a concern probably that this might actually detract slightly from the tour itself. If it goes viral and people start to think, oh, this guy's, doing this amazing thing, this amazing feat, and it picks up a lot of kind of traction with people online, it'd be interesting to see how ASO reacts, that's the tour organisers, because they might think, well, it's okay doing this, one day or something. Don't want you to take over.
Well, we'll see. And actually, we're hoping to speak to Lachlan Morton for the next episode of La Course on Tets podcast. Now, the only reason I say hopefully, it's definitely happening. We just don't know if we can get hold of him at the right time when he's actually stopped. That's going to be the issue of actually scheduling when the interview is. But we shall try. Now, before we end, we need to get down on paper who you think is going to win the Tour de France this year. I'm not going to do the top three. I just want one name that is going to win it. Now, the Grim Reaper should start. Pete, whose Tour de France do you want to ruin by choosing them?
Pete was looking at me then.
I still feel so bad about Mikel Landa and the Giro, but I'm going to go for the obvious name. You picked me first, OJ, so I'm going to go for Tadej Pogacar. I think he's going to win the Tour, and he's going to win easily.
Interesting. Sophie, come on then, where are you going?
I'm going to go Roglic, even though I don't know this experiment of him not racing is going to work out, because I think he prefers racing, and the team, I think at one point actually last year, told him he had to slow down. So I think it's a big gamble, but I'm going to say Roglic.
Oh, Jeremy, what are you saying?
Well, I'm going to give my podium, because that's the way I do things. That's the way I roll.
Hello,
that's the way I roll. Having got one out of the top 50 on the Giro, I'm feeling confident. So I'm going to say that Tadej Pogacar will inevitably win the Tour de France, and he will be closely followed by Richard Carapaz, and Theo Gegenhardt will ride the coattails of the Ineos train and sneak onto the podium.
So what will happen to Geraint Thomas then, just to follow your thinking through?
I think he'll get blown out by the serial attacks on some mountain stage. I don't know which mountain stage it will come on, but I think that it will just be the pace will be at some point. Even though he's in great shape, and I don't dispute that for a minute, I just think Pogacar, this force of nature, I think he's just going to blow everyone, apart from Carapaz, pretty much out the water.
Okay, interesting. I'm going to put a name down. Now, of all the many vices I've had in my life, the one that I've never got into is betting. And the reason for that is I love an outside shot. I always did. And any time I've been to the horses, which is once, and every time I've been to the dog track, which is about twice, I've always gone for the outside bets, and normally lost. So I'm going to go, because I'm a romantic at heart, I think because he's had a baby, I think he's riding for more than just glory. I think he's riding for the name. I'm going to go Julian Alaphilippe. Now, I know...
God.
I know. Listen, I know. But I just think there's something in it. I think there's something in it, and I think De Koenig, Quick Step, they're raw when it comes to GC racing, but this could be the year. Plus, I'd quite like to see everyone not riding for Cavendish.
Well, I think you may have a point in terms of the podium, but I don't see him winning, and I thought it's inevitable, really, that he will have some fantastic moments, I think, but I can't see him winning.
Thank you to Sophie, to Pete and to Jeremy. They're off for a lovely French dinner now in Brittany. Thank you again to our presenting sponsor, Hyperice. I shall now say goodbye to the tones of Paulo Costa, remixed with me working on my legs. Oh! So good!
Via, vieni via di qui. Niente più ti lega a questi luoghi.